The courtroom was unnaturally quiet. A heavy silence hung in the air, thick and dense, as if the room itself was bracing for something monumental to happen. Everyone seemed to be holding their breath. The only sound that punctuated the stillness was the ticking of the old wall clock by the judge's bench. Its rhythmic ticking, though faint, seemed to echo louder with each passing second. A slight breeze crept through the tall, narrow windows, causing the dust particles in the air to dance like forgotten memories, suspended for a brief moment before fading away. It felt like time had come to a halt. All eyes in the room were on one person, Emma, sitting on the witness stand. Her legs dangled in the air, too short to touch the wooden step beneath her. The small, fragile figure seemed to shrink further under the heavy weight of the moment. The courtroom buzzed with expectations, but Emma remained silent, clutching a weathered sketchbook in her lap. Its edges were soft from constant use, a quiet testament to her need for solace. She clutched it as though it were a shield, a comfort. In the face of overwhelming uncertainty, Emma wore a pale blue dress with tiny white stars stitched along the hem. It was a dress that appeared to be chosen with care, perhaps by someone hoping to appear brave, even if that bravery was more of a desire than a belief. But she didn't fidget, she didn't cry. She simply sat there, unmoved by the eyes that scrutinized her presence in the room like a quiet, fragile reminder of everything that had gone wrong. Opposite Emma sat two contrasting figures, symbols of her past and potential future. On the left, the woman from Child Protective Services, calm and composed, yet radiating a quiet tension. She was focused, her gaze sharp, like someone trained to observe and measure every movement. On the right, Emma's stepfather, Thomas. His jaw was clenched tight, his posture rigid and stiff, his eyes filled with anger, though he worked hard to conceal it. Yet, Emma didn't look at either of them. Instead, her gaze was fixed on a familiar figure just beyond the wooden barrier of the witness stand. A large dog, his fur graying at the edges, wearing a soft blue vest. Bruno. His amber eyes never wavered from Emma, his posture unwavering. He didn't move. He didn't blink. He just sat there, his presence as steady as the silence in the room. For Emma, Bruno was the constant, the one who had been there through it all, and here now was no different. Emma had not always lived in that house. Once there was a time, a brief and blurry time, when she had a real mother. She could still remember the faint traces of her mother's laughter, the gentle warmth of small hands braiding her hair. The way bedtime stories made the world feel safe made the monsters seem less real. But after her mother's death, everything changed. That world was lost to her in an instant, and in its place, she was thrust into a new life, a life with her stepfather, Thomas. At first, Emma didn't understand what was wrong. On paper, everything seemed fine. Thomas had a stable job, a small, modest house just outside of town, and no criminal record. He seemed to be the perfect fit for the role of a father. But appearances can be deceiving. The truth was that, to Thomas, Emma wasn't a child to care for. She wasn't someone to be loved. To him, she was just a burden, a leftover from a time that was no longer relevant. And so the neglect began. It started slowly. The missed meals, the forgotten birthdays, the cold, distant glances that spoke louder than any words. At first, Emma thought it was just a phase, a temporary lapse. But as the days passed and the months turned to years, she realized that this was her life now. The isolation became more pronounced. No friends allowed over, no phone calls, no school field trips. Her world shrank with each passing day until it became too small to breathe in. Emma stopped asking why, because she knew the answer. There was no reason. She was simply unwanted. The anger, when it came, was unpredictable. One moment, Thomas would be calm, as if everything were normal, and the next, a small mistake a cup left on the table, a glass of water spilled, would set him off. His rage was like a storm, sudden and violent. Emma could never predict when it would come, but she learned early that it was always there, lurking beneath the surface. She couldn't avoid it. She couldn't outrun it. She could only endure. But Emma had learned to disappear. Not physically, she still went to school and handed in her homework, but emotionally. She closed off. She became a ghost in her own life. No one noticed. No one cared. But there was one thing in her life that hadn't turned away. One thing that saw her, even when everyone else did not. Bruno wasn't a remarkable dog by most standards. He was old, slow. His fur had faded from a deep brown to a patchy mix of gray and tan. One ear flopped permanently to the side, and he walked with a limp from an old injury. But to Emma, he was everything. He was the only one who didn't look at her like she was a problem. Bruno was her silent companion, her constant presence. He didn't do tricks, he didn't play fetch, and he didn't even bark much. But whenever Emma sat alone on the porch, her knees drawn tight to her chest, Bruno would shuffle over and lay beside her. He didn't try to fix anything. He didn't try to make her feel better. He just sat there, close enough to remind her that she wasn't invisible. Emma learned that sometimes the most powerful form of love is not found in words or grand gestures. Sometimes it's just the quiet presence of someone who is willing to sit beside you, no questions asked. And in Bruno, Emma found that love. He was her constant, her protector, her silent guardian in a world that had so often abandoned her. It was the cold she remembered first, not the yelling, not the breaking glass, not the violence. The cold, wooden floor beneath her feet as she tried to run. It was that night, the night when everything shifted. It had started like any other. Thomas came home late, and Emma could feel the change in the air the moment he walked through the door. The tension was thick, heavy, dangerous. It was the kind of silence that always came before the storm. Emma knew better than to speak. She had learned that silence was her only defense. But tonight, silence couldn't save her. A cup was left on the table. That's all it took. One small mistake, one wrong look. One booming voice that shattered the fragile peace in the house. Thomas grabbed her by the arm. His grip was tight. His fingers dug into her skin like a vice, and the rage on his face was something Emma had come to fear. He didn't speak at first. His eyes were wild. He was too angry to form words. And then he reached for the belt. Emma's heart raced. She tried to break free, stumbling down the hallway barefoot, her legs shaking with fear. She reached the bedroom door and tried to close it, but Thomas was faster. His fury was a wave, and Emma was caught in its undertow. Her body trembled and her mind raced with fear, but there was one thought that kept rising above all the others. She had to get away. She had to hide. And then a sound. A deep guttural growl that Emma had never heard before. Bruno. The dog had somehow broken free. The porch gate that had always kept him contained was no match for the urgency of the moment. Bruno barreled into the hallway, positioning himself between Emma and Thomas. His large body was a living shield, strong and unwavering. Thomas froze. The anger in his eyes faltered for a brief moment, but Bruno didn't move. He didn't bark. He didn't lunge. He simply stood there, his body blocking the path between Emma and the man she feared most. Bruno didn't attack. He didn't need to. He simply stood firm, a living wall of protection. And in that moment, something changed for Emma. Someone had stepped in to protect her. Not with violence, not with anger, but with presence. Bruno didn't need to fight. He just had to be there. It didn't save everything. It didn't fix the brokenness of that house. But it was enough. For the first time in years, Emma felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. She wasn't alone. And that small flicker of hope would change her life forever. The night after the incident, Thomas didn't speak of what had happened. He didn't mention the broken gate, the growling dog, or the way Emma had stood behind Bruno, trembling but protected. Instead, he returned to his normal routine, quieter now, colder. The storm had passed, but the damage remained. And Emma? She didn't speak either. She didn't tell anyone about what happened. The silence that followed wasn't sudden. It was like water rising around her, slow and inevitable. But as she sank deeper into that silence, something began to change. She still went to school. She still handed in her assignments, but she no longer spoke up. She no longer raised her hand. She didn't make eye contact. She became a shadow of herself. But there was something else, something small and quiet. The teacher who noticed the fading bruises, the counselor who saw past the silence. And before long, the intervention came. Child Protective Services stepped in. Emma was moved to a temporary home. She didn't cry when she left. She didn't say goodbye. She packed her sketchbook and climbed into the back seat of the government car as if she had done this before. What no one expected, though, was that Bruno would come with her. The caseworker, a woman named Dana, paused as she read through the initial reports and watched Emma sit silently beside Bruno during intake. She knew that Emma had been through more than most children her age. But what she didn't realize was that Emma's heart had been healed by something simple, the quiet love of a dog who never asked for anything but was always there when she needed him most. And in that moment, Dana knew that the road ahead for Emma wouldn't be easy. But maybe, just maybe, it wouldn't be as lonely either. The courtroom was eerily silent, the kind of silence that presses down on your chest, making it hard to breathe, as if everyone in the room was holding their collective breath. It was a stillness that wasn't just about quiet. It was the kind of silence that signifies something important is about to happen, something life-changing, something impossible to take back. Even the ticking of the old wall clock seemed louder in the silence, echoing each second that passed. Like a countdown. The air felt thick with anticipation. Outside the windows, the sun had started its slow climb over the horizon, its early rays casting soft light into the courtroom. A breeze moved through the air, barely noticeable, but it caught the dust motes, making them drift lazily around the room like memories too faint to hold on to. For a moment, everything felt suspended, as if the entire world had paused and was waiting, holding its breath along with the people inside the room. At the center of all this, under the weight of all this expectation, was one small figure, Emma. She sat at the witness stand, her feet dangling just above the wooden platform, her legs too short to touch the step beneath her. Her frame was thin and delicate, even more so in that moment, as though the weight of what she was about to say, of what she had to do, was almost too much for her to bear. In her lap, she gripped a well-worn sketchbook, its corners soft and frayed from years of use. It wasn't just a sketchbook. It was her shield, her protection, her escape. She wore a pale blue dress with small embroidered stars twinkling at the hem. It was the kind of dress a child might wear when they wanted to feel brave, even if they didn't quite believe in that bravery themselves. It was clear to anyone looking that Emma didn't want to be there. But she wasn't crying. She wasn't fidgeting. She simply sat, straight-backed, gripping her sketchbook like it was the only thing holding her in the room. Her eyes were fixed forward, but it was hard to say where they were focused. She wasn't looking at the people around her. She wasn't even looking at the judge. Instead, her gaze was directed at something just beyond the wooden partition. A familiar shape, calm and unwavering. A dog. A graying German shepherd in a soft blue vest. Bruno sat motionless, not even shifting his gaze from Emma. His presence in the courtroom was unusual, But it wasn't just a procedural courtesy. Bruno had been with Emma through everything. He was more than a service dog. He was her lifeline, her constant. He didn't need to move. He didn't need to bark. His mere presence beside her in the courtroom was enough to make her feel a little less invisible, a little less alone. The weight of the past wasn't something Emma liked to think about. It was too painful, too full of gaps and shadows she didn't want to explore. But if she had to look at what had led her here, to this courtroom, to this moment, she knew the truth. Emma hadn't always lived in that house. The one that now felt more like a tomb than a home. Before everything went wrong, before the silence and the neglect took hold, there had been a time when she could remember the sound of her mother's laughter, the warmth of her mother's hands as they braided her hair, the softness of the bedtime stories her mother would whisper to chase away, the shadows that filled her room at night. But that world was gone. It had disappeared the day her mother died. Emma's life had shifted after that, thrown into a new and unfamiliar world. Her stepfather, Thomas, became her only family. He wasn't evil, not in the way people imagine monsters to be, but he was distant. He didn't see Emma as a child to be cared for. To him, she was just a burden. On paper, everything about him seemed perfect. He had a stable job. He didn't have a criminal record. He had a house, but there was something about the house that couldn't be measured by the number of bedrooms or the size of the kitchen. It was silent, empty, hollow. And Thomas, while not cruel in the way that she feared, had a coldness about him that made Emma feel invisible. The neglect started. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, missed meals, forgotten birthdays, cold stares. It was the kind of thing you might not notice at first, especially when you're a child. But Emma noticed. She always noticed. The isolation came next. No friends, no phone calls, no school trips. It wasn't just that Emma was not allowed to go places. It was that she stopped being allowed to be anywhere but in the house. It was as if the world outside no longer existed for her. She wasn't allowed to speak, either not in the way that children speak, with openness and joy. She learned early that silence kept a storm away, but it also kept her from existing. She became invisible, not just to Thomas, but to herself. And then, the anger. The anger that came like a storm. Sometimes it was words, sharp enough to wound. Other times it was more. But it was always there, lurking, waiting for her to make a mistake, any mistake that could trigger it. And Emma learned how to disappear. Not physically, but emotionally. She learned to become small, to shrink, to make herself unnoticeable. But there was one being who never turned away from her. Bruno. The unlikely protector Bruno wasn't remarkable in the way most people expected dogs to be. He was old, his fur faded to a patchy mix of gray and tan. He moved slowly, with a limp, and he rarely barked. But to Emma, Bruno was everything. He wasn't there to perform tricks or to make her laugh. He was there simply to be with her, to exist in the same space, to remind her that she wasn't invisible. He didn't judge her for the things she couldn't say. He just showed up every time she needed him. When Thomas's voice rose behind closed doors, when Emma retreated to the porch, pretending not to cry, Bruno was always there. He didn't try to fix things. He didn't try to change her world. He just sat beside her, his body close enough to offer comfort, but not too close to suffocate her. Emma didn't cry anymore. She didn't speak, but she could feel Bruno's presence beside her, and it was enough. It was the only thing that kept her grounded. It wasn't just the love of a dog. It was the love of someone who understood that sometimes silence was the only way to survive. Bruno didn't ask Emma to explain herself. He didn't ask her to speak. He just stayed close, and that was the kind of love she needed. The kind of love that didn't demand anything. And for the first time, Emma realized that maybe, just maybe, she wasn't completely invisible. Maybe she mattered, even if it was only to one soul who refused to look away. The breaking point. The day Emma found herself in the courtroom felt different than all the others. The weight of the silence in the room was more than just the absence of sound. It was the weight of everything Emma had been holding inside her for so long. She was still small, still afraid, but she wasn't alone. Not anymore. Bruno was there, standing behind the witness stand, watching over her like he always had. And this time, it wasn't just about the dog. It was about Emma taking her life. Back Judge Lane, a woman known for her no-nonsense approach to family law, sat at the bench. She had seen hundreds of cases in her career. She had witnessed everything from petty theft to violent crimes, but as she looked at Emma, she didn't see just a witness. She saw a child who was trying to find her voice in a world that had been silent for too long. When Emma's sketchbook was opened, when the drawing was held out for the judge to see, something shifted. It wasn't just a child's drawing. It was a window into Emma's soul, into everything she had suffered, into everything she had survived. And Bruno was the constant. He had been her protector, her silent witness to everything. And now, as the courtroom held its breath, everyone realized that Emma was no longer hiding. She had found her voice. And nothing, not even Thomas's shouting or his disbelief, could take that away from her. Bruno stood beside her, silent but strong, and for the first time, Emma felt a surge of something powerful inside her. Not relief, not joy, but a quiet, fierce strength that she hadn't known she possessed. And as she looked at the judge, her words came, small but clear. It's real. All of it. And the courtroom, once so full of tension, now buzzed with an energy that no one could deny. Emma had spoken. And that moment, that drawing, had become the truth no one could ignore. This was Emma's moment. And for the first time, she wasn't alone.